who had authority. And then, he said, "Be quiet sternly, come out of him." And it came out of him. And so all the people were amazed because he gives orders and they obey him. So there's a lot of, like, it's like you said, Kelly, I think it's like he's showing his power, like in the context of like in a hierarchy, like he's showing that he's powerful and that he's high up in the hierarchy, like he's putting that out there.
Yep. Bingo.
Because later on he's gonna turn that upside down, right?
But
Yeah.
let's talk about what is exactly unclean spirit mean. Because, I mean, if you read this, it's like, I'm watching The Exorcist. But I don't think it's that. I mean, it's like, what does unclean spirit mean here?
I have no idea.
Okay, great. And you're the scholar. Okay.
That's what it sounds like. Yeah.
This is like pea soup style exorcism.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Crab walking.
But clearly that probably didn't happen that way. Could it? I mean, I guess it could.
I mean, I've met people that had an unclean spirit and they're creepy. And I have no better way to describe that person than that they were doing things that brought evil into their lives and they enjoyed that. And I met a guy when I was younger who was, I'm 5'8". He was maybe like 5'4". He was not a very tall guy. And he picked up our pastor and threw him about 6 feet. And I have no explanation for that behavior. So I don't live believing that people are walking around with evil spirits or anything like that, but I have seen things that I can't explain. And as far as scholarly, I have no idea what they mean by unclean spirit. Unfortunately, this verse has been used over the centuries to mean people that have epilepsy. There's another section where it talks about a young boy that has an unclean spirit and it throws him into the fire and he falls down and foams at the mouth and convulses. And it clearly sounds like somebody who's having a grand mal seizure. And unfortunately, for millennia, people that had epilepsy were seen as evil and people try to pray it out of them. Right? Yeah, it sucks.
You didn't understand what was going on. Like back in this time, they didn't know, they didn't get it. So
yeah. So this could be anything from that to, it could be somebody who has a mental illness. And again, like the church has not always dealt nicely with people with, dramatic mental illnesses because of verses like this. So yeah, really, honestly, I can't tell you exactly what it means, and it could be all of the above.
But they're amazed that Jesus is they're amazed that this unclean person is responding. Like Jesus exorcised him right before their eyes.
Yeah. So I want everybody to turn to Matthew 4 and just keep your finger in Mark. Yeah. Matthew comes before Mark, so you have to go left in the Bible to find it.
Thank you.
Welcome.
Matthew what?
4. Cool. Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, bless the bed that I lie on.
It looks like a nice bed.
I'm just, if you remember that little childhood rhyme that they teach good Catholic kids, you'll always remember the first 4 books of the New Testament.
I think
they said good Catholic kid.
Yeah, what kind of Catholic
terrible Catholic.
I think we got the Gospels, yeah.
Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. Yes. I also have a little rhyme for remembering some of the letters that Paul wrote, because I taught children for too many years. Anyway.
I'm at Matthew 4.
Okay, sweet. So can you just see the headlines there? Jesus tested in the wilderness. Jesus begins to preach. Jesus calls his first disciples. Do you have title sections like that?
Yeah.
Yep. Jesus heals the sick.
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay, so I want you to go to Matthew 4:23. I'll read 4:23. Jesus went throughout the Galilee, teaching in their synagogues, which we just heard this story from Mark, right? Proclaiming the good news of the kingdom, healing every disease and sickness among the people, and news spread about him. Okay? So this is Matthew giving us a little bit more than Mark gave us for the same section. And then Matthew starts this section that's famous that we call the Sermon on the Mount.
The Beatitudes.
And we can all picture Jesus up on this hillside with the multitudes on the hill around him. And he's preaching and giving this big, long thing with which, frankly, some pastors, some teachers will tell you, if you're going to live your life on anything, just read the Beatitudes and kind of commit to trying to live that way and you're golden. So, but what I want you to see in the Beatitudes are these statements. Look at verse 17. Verse 17, this is Jesus. He says, "Do not think I have come to abolish the law or the prophets," which again, the writings of Moses, okay? And then that's the law, is the writings of Moses. And the prophets are all of the big prophets, Isaiah, Jonah, all those guys, right? "Do not think I have come to abolish the law of the prophets. I have not come to abolish them, but to fulfill them." Now think about that for a second. I have come to fulfill the law and the prophets. Like, this is a giant. Who the hell do you think you are? Right? He just proclaimed himself Messiah, because that's who fulfills the law, right? Then he goes on, "For truly I tell you," and truly, when he said, whenever you hear Jesus say that word, truly, truly I tell you, he's not saying, really, come on, believe me. He's saying, I have the authority to tell you. Just because I say it, you should believe me. Like, this word is grounded in me. Does that make sense? Like, just because I say it, that's all you need to know. Okay, so he says, truly I tell you, until heaven and earth disappear, not the smallest letter, not even the least stroke of a pen will by any means disappear from the law. And then he goes on. I want to see that in verse 20, he says, "For I tell you that unless your righteousness surpasses that of the Pharisees and the teachers of the law, you will certainly not enter the kingdom of heaven." So Jesus, in that one verse, in verse 20, sets himself up as judge, more than the teachers of the law and the Pharisees, who ran the temple. And they were the ones that decided what the law meant and told the people, this is what the law means. And Jesus, in that one verse in 20, says, I tell you who gets to enter the kingdom of heaven or not. I mean, talk about levels of authority, Sarah, right? He's not quoting anybody else. He's saying, I say. Now, this is what's important here. In the next section, 21, he says, you have heard it said. And that phrase, you have heard it said, is echoed over and over and over in the Beatitudes and in other places in the Gospels. Jesus says, you have heard it said, you shall not murder, and anyone who murders will be subject to judgment. But I tell you. And he's quoting from the law, and he's quoting from Leviticus. He's quoting from their book, right? The Hebrew Bible. And he says, you have heard it said, or it was written, but I tell you. Like, what I say is more important than Torah. Like, that's heresy. Or it's true. But there's not a lot of middle ground. He either was who he said he was, or he was insane. You know, you don't stand up in front of a couple of thousand good Jews with Pharisees in the bunch and say, I'm here to tell you what's real.
And he's sort of changing the rules a little bit, right? Like, yeah. He's saying what you believe is not necessarily the way it needs to be or should be. And if you don't believe me, that's your problem because I am the truth. Yes,
right. Okay, so now go back to Mark. Go back to Mark, and I want you to read again this verse where he says, the people were, in 22, the people were amazed at his teaching because he taught them as one who had authority not as the teachers of the law. So here's the difference. I sit here every week and hope to God I'm quoting my professors correctly. And I quote from every commentary I can find, because that's the best I can do, is quote somebody else, right? In that way, I'm like a teacher of the law.
Yeah.
Jesus is setting himself up as the authority. So he's teaching, when he talks, apparently, say again, Mark is the fast food gospel. So Mark just gives us this one line. The people were amazed at his teaching. We don't get to hear what he said. Matthew goes on for 4 chapters about what he said, right? But these people heard this voice of authority in the way Jesus taught them. It was different than the way the Pharisees taught them. Because the Pharisees just would quote, Moses and older rabbis and, quote the text. But Jesus was like, no, like, I'm here to tell you, this is the way it is. And the people were amazed. I mean, the word is like shocked. I think, I'm not sure if this is the Greek word that means like dynamite, but they were like blown away by the manner in which he taught, and then it goes down further in 27. It says the people were all so amazed that they asked each other, what is this? Is this a new teaching? And with authority. He even gives orders to impure spirits and they obey him. So what's Mark trying to do? Like, we're still trying to get our heads around Mark's purpose here. So why does Mark start with this story?
Because none of the rest of it makes any sense unless he's established his power.
Yep.
And proven who he is.
Yep. And we see a similar vein throughout all the Gospels, obviously, because, the Gospels are nothing if they don't help people find the good news. That's what gospel means, right? So, but Mark is very intentional in the way he goes about it. He's like, he came to the river to get baptized, a bird landed on his shoulder. We all heard the voice from heaven. People immediately flocked to him, so holding up Jesus as this very charismatic person that people wanted to follow. And then boom, here's the proof that the people were amazed at what he said, and not just what he said, but how he said it. So Mark is immediately diving in. Like, you should listen to what this story I'm going to tell you about this guy.
Mm-hmm.
What do you think, Kelly?
Yeah, I mean, it's...
Yeah?
Yeah,
Oh.
I mean, Jesus is going to come save the world. It's like, there you have it.
We need to look quickly at verse 25, because Jesus says this really bizarre thing. After the Spirit has said, I know who you are, you're the Holy One of God, which is Mark's point. Why does Mark have Jesus tell this man to be quiet? And we can look at our lesson, and I think it might help us out a little bit, but the other Gospels don't have this. It happens a lot in Mark. Mark has what we call the secret Messiah, or the secret Jesus going on, that he's always saying, shh, don't tell people what you just saw. He heals people and then says, go back where you came from, but don't tell anybody it was me.
That's not how I read it.
Mm-mm.
So before he says, I know who you are, the Holy One of God, before he says that, he says, what do you want with us, Jesus of Nazareth? Have you come to destroy us? I know who you are. You're the Holy One of God. So he's acknowledging Jesus's power and then saying, what are you going to do? You're going to destroy us? And so I thought that's why Jesus said, be quiet. And then he said, come out of him, because it was the evil that was in him that was basically making his power out to be something that would be used for evil.
Yeah, okay. I actually think you're probably right. Although it is true that Mark's Jesus tells people, don't tell people who I am. Don't tell people who healed you. This just isn't one of those moments.
Okay.
Okay, probably, right.
Why does Jesus tell everybody to keep it on the down low?
I don't know. It's a really good question. I just did New Testament with a Jewish lady who is the New Testament teacher at my seminary is Jewish, because progressive Christian. And she didn't really have an answer. Like, nobody really knows why. I mean, you'd have to ask Mark, but it's just part of what Mark's gospel is like. That Jesus is always like, now don't tell people.
Well, okay.
I don't
Is it like Jesus showing humility? Like, look,
Yeah.
I don't want a lot of attention or anything like that.
Yeah, it
don't
definitely could be that. It could be that Jesus, we see throughout the Gospels, Jesus always points to his Father. He always says, the power that's in me comes from my Father. And so then you get into this, whole idea of Christology, like, who was Jesus? And that that's the other class I took this spring, which I've been waiting to take for 3 years. And it gets really deep into our beliefs as Christians when you start thinking about the person of Jesus Christ and what you believe about that person. Do you believe he was divine? Do you believe he was human? Do you believe he was some kind of blend? What did the blend look like? And it matters when you start thinking about things like salvation, depending on what you believe about salvation. If Jesus was only human, can belief in him save you? If Jesus is of divine person running around in human skin, which actually is a heresy called asceticism. But if you believe that the humanity was like a skin over his divinity, then did he really suffer like we suffer? So it was a great class, and the whole point of the class was for us to be able to articulate our beliefs about Christ. And like the paper that we wrote was basically, this is what I believe about the person of Jesus Christ. And you get into all kinds of things. What is the afterlife? Like, what you believe about the person of Jesus Christ will affect what you believe the afterlife is like, if there is one. Like, so was Jesus just being humble and like passing all the praise back to the Father? Yeah. That's definitely part of who Jesus was. So maybe that's what he was doing.
Well, and I kind of feel like how when people have like a celebrity or whatever, and they're just like, oh, they worship the person,
Yeah.
like it becomes more about the person instead of about, and I could see maybe like Jesus would be like, look, it's not about me. It's about like what I'm trying to teach you.
Yeah. Right.
I don't know.
Yeah. I mean, it could be many of those things. And I think someplace in the lesson they cover that. And then when I get home and I have all my resources back, I'll go back to my resources on New Testament and dig up what she wrote about Mark. So we're definitely going to stumble into it more than once. So it'll come up again.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Okay. So what do we think? Do we want to move on?
Sure.
Yeah?
Yeah.
All right. So who wants to read 29 through 34? Right?
Okay. As soon as they left the synagogue, they went with James and John to the home of Simon and Andrew. Simon's mother-in-law was in bed with a fever, and they immediately told Jesus about her. So he went to her, took her hand, and helped her up. The fever left her, and she began to wait on them. That evening after sunset, the people brought to Jesus all the sick and demon-possessed. The whole town gathered at the door, and Jesus healed many who had various diseases. He also drove out many demons, but he would not let the demons speak because they knew who he was.
See, there's that thing.
The demons again.
Yeah. Yeah, it's weird. Hang on, I see Alexis messaging me. Oh, okay. She's just welcoming Misha to the group. Okay. Yeah, now, Simon, the Simon that's mentioned is Peter. he's the guy that Jesus changes his name and calls him Peter, which means rock, later. And he says, this is the rock upon which I will build my church, which is another whole conversation. But that's the Simon that we're talking about. So it's Peter's mother that's sick. And I like that they're all just staying there. They're probably there for a meal and a place to spend the night. And after one healing, and then he heals Peter's mother. But after that, it says that evening after sunset, so it's dark out. And then they're bringing Jesus all these sick and demon-possessed people to the door, it says. The whole town's gathering at the door of this house. Like, what? I mean, I guess if somebody came to town and said they could cure people, just by speaking to them, we'd bring all our sick friends too.
If they said they could cure the Rona, we would.
Right?
Lined up.
Mm-hmm.
So it says Jesus healed many who had various diseases. He also drove out many demons, but he wouldn't let the demons speak because they knew who he was. I mean, yeah, I think we've already kind of talked about that. But, and again, here's Mark just, giving us the short and skinny. If you read in Matthew, like a lot of these stories are more built out. They're, they say who it was and what they had and how Jesus healed them. So then we have another sort of change in scenery here in verse 35. I'll read. It says, very early in the morning, while it was still dark, Jesus got up, left the house, and went off to a solitary place where he prayed. Simon and his companions went to look for him. And when they found him, they exclaimed, everyone's looking for you. Jesus replied, let us go somewhere else, to the nearby villages, so I can preach there also. That is why I have come. So he traveled throughout Galilee, preaching in their synagogues and driving out the demons. So I wrote in my note on the edge, I often write in my Bible on the edge, and I wrote, why not stay? Why go?
Almost like it doesn't make sense because God should be infinite, right? But it's almost like a scarcity thing. Like there's not enough Jesus to go around.
Oh.
He's like he wants to spread the wealth. Like he can't fix everybody, but
it sounds like he's campaigning too. He's
yeah.
out there proving, nobody believes me, and it's so I'm just going to show you, and now I got to move on. This is done. Check. Move on.
We
Right?
often we will see Jesus again. He's always on the move. So Jesus' ministry, or what we call that part of his life, lasted 3 years about. And so this is the very beginning. And he's always on the move. He doesn't stay anywhere for very long. Sometimes because his life is in danger and he's been threatened, and he sort of, there's a couple of places where it says he walked through the crowd and nobody saw him. Like he sort of disappeared himself through the crowd so he could get out of town. And there's other places where it sounds like they've been chased out of town. And then later in his ministry, he's clearly heading for Jerusalem and appears to know why. In other words, he says to his disciples, the day is coming, when I'm going to be killed, and 3 days later I'm going to rise from the dead. And that's why I've come. And he says it very clearly in one of the Gospels 3 different times. I think it's in Mark. And he's just always heading, this trajectory is to Jerusalem. So if your Bible has a map in the back, sometimes it'll show you like the travels of Jesus, or at least it'll have place names and you can sort of track it. But he just kind of goes everywhere throughout Judea. And he goes into a couple places that he's not supposed to go, like Samaria, which was where those other people lived that we're not supposed to talk to. And he goes there. And he goes to Jerusalem 3 times in 3 years. So this is just the beginning of us seeing this pattern. And part of this pattern that I want you to pick up on is after he does this healing, these many healings, he goes off by himself to pray. And this says early in the morning, and other places it'll say late at night, but he'll walk away. I think you see it, if not in Mark, you definitely see it in Matthew after the feeding of the 5,000. It says he goes off to a lonely place by himself. And the disciples actually have to talk him into coming back. And I've always kind of gotten this sense of kind of this beleaguered soldier. You know, he's just like, could I just get a moment alone? I mean, they use the word, the Gospels use the word clamoring. People clamored for his attention. You know, there, you can picture, it says, this here says the whole town gathered around the door. You know, and it must have just been exhausting to be that guy.
Yeah.
You know, that everybody's just demanding your attention all the time, you know. And in another place in the Gospels, it talks about, you guys probably heard the story of the woman that had a bleeding that she'd had for many years. And she finally like hears about Jesus and she follows him, and she finally is able to just kind of reach through the crowd and touch his robe, you know, the hem of his garment, and she's healed. And the Bible says that Jesus felt the power drain out of him when she touched him. So was there sort of a spiritual power that he had to heal that could be drained, or that at least he noticed and he had to go away and recharge, you know? And again, this, we'll see this pattern over and over, that every now and then he just sort of splits, you know? What do you guys think about that?
Yes, I have something to say again. Well, like Jane and I were just talking about that, like, you know, she was at work today and things just got busy, and, you know, there were phone calls that were missed and people needed things, and it was just constant. And I was, you know, reminiscing that I remember how that is too, like going to work and it's like everybody freaking needs me. And there's not enough of me to go around. I can't fix everything. I've got to pick and choose, you know, and I remember the knock, knock on my door, ma'am, do you have a minute? The answer is always no, but I don't say that. I say, yes, of course, come on in, sit down and deal with that problem, and know that that means that I'm going to stay at work now another hour later to finish what I was doing just now. So I definitely like identify with that. And then I think that that's like maybe almost good role modeling. Like you do need time alone to recharge. And like even General Mattis, like Mad Dog Mattis, he talks about that in some of his professional development, you know, recommendations, like just taking time alone to read and process through things that have happened, and then, you know, synthesize it with what you're learning or whatever. That's important to grow. It's important for growth. So I guess I get that pattern. It makes sense to me.
Yep.
Well, I think the many passages or verses where, you know, you just find out that Jesus went away to pray. I think this is really about the recharging power of prayer and looking up, more than just taking a break from in your job.
Yeah.
You know, it's deeper than that.
It's the spiritual reconnecting.
And I think that, you know, that so many references about Jesus doing that shows that he is one of us, that he's not really the God, but he is one of us on the earth, and he's got to go talk to God. Because if he can't talk to God, and if he doesn't talk to God, he can't do what he's doing on a very large scale of what we believe he's doing in the Bible.
He's being a good role model. He's leading by example.
Yep.
Absolutely.
Yep. And I think if Jesus was portrayed in the Bible as Superman, I'd be less likely to follow him. I think one of the things for me that makes Jesus attractive is he gets pissed at people and yells and, you know, occasionally causes upset with people. And goes away to be quiet and pray. I mean, he does all the things. He expresses emotions in all the ways that we do, that I do. And that's very charming. You know, it's very attractive.
Charming is a good word. And attractive, yeah.
Yeah. You know, that's a Jesus I can identify with.
And
And I think depending on your, oh, sorry, Kelly, go ahead.
No, I'm just saying, for me, it makes him more like me. I mean, I want to be like him, but it makes him more like me because he's human. So.
Yeah. And I think for me, and again, this all comes down to what we believe about Jesus, which I think is healthy if it's always evolving. Like that, if we always are sort of thinking, what do I think he was? Who was he? What was he like? Right. That for me, like, this is Jesus identifying with me. You know what I mean? This isn't a Jesus who's above it all. You know, this is a Jesus who left heaven behind and came down here to walk a life that I walk. Right. And so when I'm going through hard times and I'm tired and I'm sick of people knocking on my door, I can go, okay. He understands when I go in prayer and go, seriously, I've had enough. I'm done. I want to put this down. And he's like, yep, been there. And this story tells me that he was there and he does understand it, that he identifies with my suffering, you know? And that, yeah, that's just one of the many reasons that, you know, I say I'm a follower of Jesus Christ, because this isn't just some superhuman, you know, Superman that can do everything and has no idea what it's like to be me, you know? So, yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah. Hey, we're clicking along, you guys. Look at us tearing it up here. And I just want to throw in about this going to other places. You know, it's an interesting response. You know, he never answers the frickin' question. There's a great book out there by a UCC pastor. If you give me a second, I'll come up with his name. It's hard to say. And it's like the 127 questions that Jesus asked and the 7 he answered, which is like the actual number somebody counted in the gospel. You know, he doesn't ever answer the frickin' question, you know? And so his disciples come to him and they're like, everyone's looking for you, you know? And he replies, having nothing to do with all of these people that are looking for him, let's go someplace else. You know, it's like, they're probably like, what? Like, no, like we have to go back. You know, like the people here, and it's Simon's town. It's his hometown, literally. His mother lives there. And I think if I was the disciples, I'd be like, no, like there's more people to heal. Like you have to come back. You have to finish.
I'm telling you, he was campaigning. He was campaigning for Christ. Like I've got to move on. I've got to prove to the rest of these numbskulls that I am who they say I am.
Yeah. And again, here's this line. That is why I have come. And Jesus had a mission, you know, and he had a goal and he followed it, you know, and regardless of the obstacles that came up, like he pushed through and he kept going. He's like, nope, like this is what I'm here to do. And, you know, some people have said, I've heard it preached from different, you know, pastors, that he's able to make this statement about, no, let's go someplace else, because this is why I've come, because he had spent some time in prayer, because he went back to his Father and was like, okay, tell me again, like why I need to go through this. Like I'm exhausted already and it's been one day, you know. I also want you to notice Mark's pattern in 29. As soon as they'd left the synagogue, like right that moment, all of the transitions in Mark, it's like whiplash. And then, and next, and right away, it's like, freaking Mark, seriously, like, could you give us a moment, you know? It couldn't have been like, and 3 days later. No, it's like, and right then, you know? And so you'll just kind of you'll get with the flow. Was it actually the very next day? I don't know. Again, if you try to line the Gospels up chronologically, they don't. Minute by minute, day by day. We know his ministry took about 3 years. but they do not agree. There's not a nice line of this was March 21st and then March 22nd, like doesn't work like that. But again, Mark's urgency comes through. Mark's need to get this word out quickly comes through in these transitional statements, and then, and right away, and, so anyway. Okay, so 39, so he travels throughout Galilee, preaching in their synagogues. I always wondered why it says their synagogues. Aren't they his synagogues? I think it means like the town synagogue.
Yes.
Okay. But it just has always struck my ear a little wrong.
And again, he's casting out demons again. So let's assume that the ratio of demons in the world back then compared to the ratio of demons today, what are these demons? What does that really mean? What do you think that means?
I think Sarah touched on it earlier. You have to remember that these are, pre-Aristotle, pre-Aristotelian doctors. These are pre-modern medicine. They don't know from demon to the common cold. They don't know, they don't have science. So, were they demons? I don't know. Was it epilepsy? I don't know.
Like alcoholism is a demon, cheating on your wife is a demon. So just all of these things that are bad.
That didn't matter back then, though.
Yeah. More like medical stuff, lots of medical stuff, mental health stuff.
Yeah. So we just need to be careful that when we, and I know you guys all know this, but like when we refer to the casting out of a demon, meaning that Jesus cured the guy of epilepsy, that we're not likening epilepsy to a demon, or even saying that having epilepsy is somehow wrong and that you need to be cured of it. You know what I mean? Like we don't want to take the culture of the time of the Bible and try to apply it to our modern understanding of medicine and mental illness. Right? Right.
No, we don't want to do that.
We don't want to do that. But it's hard. Just saying. And again, this literal understanding, we talk about a literal understanding of the Bible. I don't see demons. I mean, walking around, like I told you, I've seen things I can't explain, but yeah.
I mean, I know people that believe, I know people that pray every night that to let go of all entities that have attached to them during the day and to sever all entities on their kids. I mean, I stage my house and I'll say some weird shit. I mean, I don't know, just in case. It's more like just covering my bases.
I don't see a downside really.
If there's anything here, let's just clear this shit, because I don't know. I mean, so there's people, it's not like the Exorcist style, but like that do believe that there's dark forces. And I'm not like saying satanic, whatever, but whether it's interdimensional or if it's just something that we don't, see or understand, that there are forces or energies that that influence people and do cause physical illnesses or mental breakdowns. I mean, I think that our understanding of mental health is super limited, and this like educational, oh no, we figured out the brain. Well, I mean, I think there's a whole lot of components that have to do with that aren't totally explained, and that aren't just, diet and all sorts of things have to do with it. And those are all like physical, chemical things. But I think there are other external forces, and the freaking moon. And I don't know, all sorts of things. So I don't know. I'm open to the demon thing personally.
Like, yeah, I'm not going to say there's not. I'm not going to say there are. I'm just saying, leave me alone. So
My ex said that, just makes it suspect already, but my ex said that when she was a kid, a demon came into their house and they all prayed really, really hard and made it leave. And like it terrified her. Like, so.
I've been to physical places that had energies that were weird. I mean, I've been to places where I'm like, something horrible is still here. Like, I mean, they've even shown that, like, well, even sometimes I grew up on Tubbs Hill, and there's courts and like a lot of like Indian burial stuff, and I mean, there's some weird stuff that like, and I could feel it. I'd like turn like what like there's something behind me, like you could feel it. Like I can't explain that. I don't know what that is, but
I was at a bookstore one time, went in this bookstore with a friend of mine, just your average, sort of Auntie's bookstore. It was a little bit smaller, but it was just a bookstore. And we were just walking around. It was cool. And, she went upstairs and she goes, hey, come up here. And I went up there and was like, no. And I was like, oh, I just got creeped out I didn't see anything. I didn't know, hair on the back of my neck stood up. And the other time I felt that, well, I've felt it a couple times. The other time I felt that I was at the Mayan ruins in Tulum, Mexico. And it's massive structure. You climb up, I forget, 80 steps or so. I mean, it's just huge, and you can climb all over this thing. And so I was standing in this one area, and all of a sudden I was like, just like my stomach got weird, and I was like, my heart started beating. I'm like, I want out. Like, I don't know what this is, but I'm ready to go back down the stairs. And one of the people I was with, we were on a mission trip, and one of the people I was with reads her little, tourist sheet, and she's like, oh, this is the well where they did human sacrifice. And I'm like, I'm out. Like, there is just some creepy stuff in the world, and no, thank you. And I think, on a positive note, I think it's good to like acquire that ability to tune in and listen to those kind of things. Why not? You know what I mean? If we believe that the Spirit of God pervades and is everywhere at all times, and we can tap into that, why can't we tap into the thing that says, this is not a good place and you should go?
Well, I think if I believe that, I mean, I do, that my life is being like, that there is an energy that can better my life for good, that has to do with my spirituality, and that, turning over certain things in my life to like a higher power, like that's positively affecting my daily life or whatever, that there is an opposite force of that, like that's not just one-sided, that like there are, and I don't like the whole Satan thing personally, but that there are, there's negative energy too.
Yeah.
Agreed.
Stands to reason to me. So let's go on. This is the last story in this chapter. A man with leprosy came to him and begged him on his knees, if you are willing, you can make me clean. Jesus was indignant. Do you like that? Jesus gets indignant. I'm on 40, verse 40. Sorry, did I move on? So Jesus was indignant. He reached out his hand and touched the man. I am willing, he said, be clean. Immediately the leprosy left him and he was cleansed. Jesus sent him away at once with a strong warning. See that you don't tell this to anyone, but go, show yourself to the priest, and offer the sacrifices that Moses commanded for your cleansing as a testimony to them. Instead, the man went out and began to talk freely, spreading the news. As a result, Jesus could no longer enter a town openly, but stayed outside in lonely places. Yet the people still came to him from everywhere. So what do we think of that?
Are we on?
Yeah, we're on.
Okay. Well, he was telling people not to tell because he didn't want to be overwhelmed.
Well, or like killed too soon.
That too. Yeah.
I mean, it might be eventually, but yeah.
Mhm.
Like it was dangerous to like for people to know is what it sounds like.
Yeah.
And
yeah, literally overwhelmed by the sheer numbers of people that would want the same cleansing. Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
But I feel like Jesus is saying like, I've cleansed you. I've healed you. You're a better person now. Now, don't make a big deal out of what I did. Now, take this as another chance and go out and do God's work. That's what I see. That's what I heard.
Yeah.
That's what I read.
And
Don't focus on what I did for you. Just be thankful and move on, and just do, pass it forward, so to speak, or play it forward, whatever they say.
yeah. And we can see Jesus here again, or not again, but telling this man to go and do what Moses requests. So this is that temple worship that they practiced at this level, at this age of Judaism. So Jews don't practice temple worship anymore. They don't offer sacrifices of animals, but they did in these days. And there is a prescription, I don't know what it is, for 2 turtle doves or a small goat or whatever the command of Moses was, that if you've been cleansed of a disease, that you have to offer the proper sacrifice at the temple in thanks to God for your cleansing. And so Jesus is like, it's interesting the way he kind of sends the guy back to that sort of Judaism of the time. Because otherwise the man can't continue to worship in the temple. So if he had gone to the priest, if the man had gone to the priest and said, hey, this guy Jesus healed me, it wouldn't have been enough, even though they could see he'd been healed of leprosy. It wouldn't have been enough. He still wouldn't be ritually clean, and they still wouldn't have let him worship at the temple, which was the only way they could worship their God. So the synagogues were for learning, but the temple was for worship, and that's where you maintained your right relationship to God, through sacrifice and bringing alms, tithes, and offerings, right? So Jesus is, I think, acting compassionately toward the man and saying, like, if you tell people that I'm the one that healed you, it's going to be tough for you to remain a good Jew in this society. So what you need to do is go offer the proper sacrifice at the temple and show the priests, like, here's the proper sacrifice. I'm bringing you the goat or whatever, so I can be ritually cleansed, and then the priest will accept you again. You'll be able to continue. But the guy doesn't do that.
No.
It's almost like, to me, I don't know, maybe I'm taking too much of it. Maybe like Jesus throwing this guy a bone, like, this is not going to go well for you if you tell people that I'm the one that healed you.
Exactly. Yeah.
But
And I mean, I think it's, I don't know, in today's time, it's like, the blessings you receive as a Christian, accept those blessings and pay it forward. Don't, go on and on about it to somebody else. And I don't know.
Yeah.
And then when you don't do that, then it makes it more difficult for Jesus to reach other people, so to speak. Maybe
Yeah,
I'm reading too much into
right.
it.
Actually, yeah, because Jesus is now in this place where he can no longer openly go into towns and synagogues, because he's just going to get either overrun or literally overrun and run out of town on a rail. So he has to be out on the hillside, like we see in Matthew, where he does the Sermon on the Mount outside of town on a hill, and the people come to him in that place.
So in today's times, I can go around and tell everybody, this is what Jesus did for me, and I'm so much better because of this, and this, and all this, blah, 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 blah. And then everybody stops listening to me, and they think, okay, well, this is blah, 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 blah. So, I mean, it's like, keep it to yourself and move on and learn from it and give to others, pay it forward, so to speak. That's what I read in that. That was like the best story, I think, that out of this lesson that I get it.
Yeah.
So.
I like that Jesus was indignant when the man said, if you're willing.
Yeah.
Like, why in the hell would I not be willing?
Right.
But I don't know. I mean, maybe, the priests that were shown in, like, the way they're described in the Gospels, they're not super nice. They're really gatekeepers for this religion, and you have to play their game their way.
Right.
And like, you kind of had to crawl, I think, to get healed. And I think that's the way the man approaches Jesus, in that same, like, it says in the Psalms that the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. But the word fear doesn't mean scared. It means awe. Like to be in awe of God, to understand the difference between you, lowly human, and that, the God of eternity. Like that's the beginning of wisdom, is to understand that there's a difference, right? And wow, that just flipped your world over right there. But it's like this guy comes crawling to Jesus because that's what he was taught to do, is like beg to be healed.
Right.
I don't know if Jesus is indignant at the guy or if Jesus is indignant at the culture that taught the guy that's how he should act. I don't know. So in one chapter, look how far Jesus has come. Look at how much has happened in just this one, right? 45 verses or whatever.
Yep.
You know?
But he's still proving himself. How frustrating is that? Like he's still got to keep proving himself and convincing people of the truth. You know, it's like, this is the truth, and he has to do these amazing things that are miracles just to prove that he's the real deal.
Yeah.
This has verse 41 where it says Jesus was indignant. It has many manuscripts say Jesus was filled with compassion.
Indignant versus compassion. Yeah.
I think that's sort of what I was trying to say.
Yeah.
That, like, dude, you don't have to come crawling on your knees.
Yeah.
Of course you should be healed.
Yeah.
You know? Because the people in those days, you know, the people that had a physical illness or a mental illness or whatever that kept them from being ritually clean, that defined their whole life. They, it meant they were going to be beggars in the street because they had no other way of making a living, because nobody would do business with them if they were not clean. Because the going to the temple, especially the once a year, you know, and for the ritual of cleansing, like that made you ritually clean. Then you couldn't interact with somebody who wasn't, because then you'd be dirty again. You'd be unclean. So the disparity between the clean and the unclean was like a giant, you know, valley. And that's why divorce was bad. I mean, it was just one of the reasons divorce was bad, because now the woman didn't have the guy to go to the temple and make the proper sacrifices, you know, and so she was left out in the cold and couldn't earn a living and ended up being, you know, whatever. I don't know that in our society we can kind of see that, except for maybe if we think about like truly destitute, like, you know, the homeless that are living in the street. But I don't think anybody in our group sees them as being dirty or sees a gulf between us and them that we don't want to cross. We might see the economic gulf that it's difficult for them to cross, but it's not like we're going to be, we don't want to not be with them, right? We, you know, we don't act like that. So I don't know that we can get our heads around that. Like what it meant to have an unclean spirit or have leprosy and not be allowed to go to church because of it. And it would define you economically, because nobody who did go to church would be allowed to do business with you or be near you or touch you.
Like a survival issue.
Yeah. I mean, lepers couldn't live in town. So, yeah, I mean, just for this guy to come to Jesus took a lot of courage. You know, maybe that's also why Jesus was compassionate. You know, just the fact that this guy was willing to put himself through possible rejection. you know. But yeah, it's really hard to, I try to like think, like put myself in that person's head, like headspace, like what did that feel like to be that guy coming to Jesus, whatever. I just don't think we can, because there's just so many differences. But I think the more we can try to ground ourselves in their religion and their culture at that time, I think the stories make a lot more sense. I think the whole literal translation of the Bible just gets completely gummed up, because we're 2,000 years, you know, of modernization from these people, and 2,000 years of, and 3 continents of different cultures.
Yeah.
We just have no way of understanding. We could try, you know. So I didn't like the questions in the lesson this week. I thought they were really sort of ABC kind of questions. Did you guys look at them at all?
I did not.
I didn't.
Nope.
Yeah, good. They weren't worth it. It's fine.
We sensed that. We were guided.
I just like the
That
conversation.
was an unclean spirit, Jane.
Yeah.
I like the conversation that you lead and letting us go rogue from time to time.
Go rogue. Well, I love that it says next week's lesson is on Mark 2, all the way through the end of Mark 3. Like, we have 2 whole chapters of Mark, like, seriously? Like, I know Mark is short, but honestly, that's a lot.
So it's all the way from 2 all the way through 3, or just Mark 2 to 3?
Well, I'm assuming that Mark 3:35, yes, is the last verse in Mark. Mark 3. So it's all of Mark 2 and all of Mark 3.
That's a lot.
It's a lot.
Well, it's not that. It's, you know, I mean, a lot of it looks like it's just more lepers and healing. Jesus proving himself, poor thing. What do you think? You're gonna be back. You'll be back. You'll be back next week, right?
Pardon me?
You'll be back next week.
I'll be back. I come home on Friday. I'll be home late Friday night. Super happy. We're ready to be home. I mean, it's lovely here. It's a beautiful house and really nice people, and we're having a good time, but 3 weeks is a long time to be gone from home.
There's no place like home, Dorothy.
There's no place like home. Okay, so not everybody thinks this Jesus is a good thing. Apparently, that's what we find out next week.
Okay.
That's pretty sure we already all knew that, but all right.
I have a question. Do you have time for one more question?
I have all the time in the world for you, Sarah.
Thanks. Okay. So, like, I remember when, like, as a kid, like, hearing these stories and stuff like that, and it was all about, you know, establishing Jesus's authority and his power and his greatness and all these things. And then, you know, you talk about all these people who came to him, you know, they had leprosy, they had unclean spirits, they had demons, they had all these, like, awful, horrific issues that they came crawling to Jesus and asked, you know, begged to be healed and saved and stuff like that. And I feel like it was always taught as a, like, you're that person who's got all these issues and you should come begging and crawling to Jesus and you know, ask to be saved. But, like, as I'm reading through it this time with you all, like, I'm finding myself identifying more with Jesus, which I feel like is sacrilegious somehow.
Yeah.
Because who am I to, but isn't that the whole point of Christianity, is that you want to be Jesus-like? So it's almost like the way these things were taught to me in the past, I feel like they missed the focus. Like the focus should be that we should all be running around trying to help people and heal people, and then take a little break to pray and stuff like that. And then move on to the next thing that needs to be helped and fixed. But it just, I don't know, like, I'm having this revelation that like, I feel like it's a complete shift in the focus.
Yeah. And I'm glad, because these stories don't have one meaning and they don't have one character. And they, like, there's not one way to read it. There's multivalent lessons in every single one of these. And, like, put yourself in the place of every character in the story. Have you ever did that thing where you like, I can't think of a particular sentence, but you say any sentence, but you put the emphasis on one word. And then the next time you say it, you put the emphasis on a different word. And you can hear all the different like meanings in the sentence. And you can do it with like, I love you. It's like, I love you. And it's like, I love you, or I love you. Like those have three fairly, different meanings. So you could read the Bible like that. You could go, okay, like, so this time I read it, I'm going to try to be this guy. Like, what did it feel like to be that guy? And then the next time you read it, you're like, what did it feel like to be Jesus in that moment? And then the other way to read it is what we call negative spaces. It's like, who's not being talked about in that story that was probably there? Right? Where were the disciples in this last story? Well, they've come up in all the others. So where were they? What were they thinking at this time? Why weren't they there? And so I think that's really good. And I think it's really healthy. And I think, the answer to why did the church teach it to you like that? Why were we always the worm? And the answer is power.
Yeah. Yeah.
If we can make you all worms,
Right.
Then, and I say that with a little bit of, I don't know what you call it, but like, it's not like we're not worms when we think of the difference between ourselves and a holy God. So, I think Job says, oh, worm am I, and God's, God at one point responds to Job by saying, were you there when I laid the foundations of the earth? Are you the one that told the seas how far they could come? I don't think so. Think that was me. You're just a guy. So, like, there is a difference between being human and being God. And I think it's healthy for us to realize that there's a difference, right? But that we need to crawl. I mean, Jesus didn't make this guy crawl. No. Jesus never made anybody crawl. Jesus healed at least two people. One story that I know I can quote, and the other one I can't. But I know there's two stories in the Gospels where Jesus heals somebody from a distance. Like, they're nowhere nearby. He, like, doesn't even take the time to go over there. He's just like, and they're healed. So the church using those story, like using this story or any other to say that, like, and we should come to Jesus like that on our knees, we should crawl, like, that's not actually even the truth of the story.
No, that's the church.
They're kind of torturing the stories of the people being healed by portraying it that way.
So for me, there's like the church. The church is us which is why I respect Judaism so much, because they study the Bible, they read the Bible, and they ask a lot of questions. And we're followers of Jesus, and we're trying to understand it. That's the church. Then there's the church that I grew up in, which didn't want us to go this deep into the Bible and have these conversations. Right?
Right. The institutional church.
Don't ask those questions because I know it means one thing. What we're doing here is the church.
Yeah.
And that's what God wants us to do, I think.
And it's really hard. And some of the people that have just joined our Bible study recently are having a really hard time with me because, I'm getting private text messages because I say things like, the stories don't agree. And they're like, what? And I'm like, they just don't. Like, you can read the narrative from John on the baptism of Jesus and the calling of the first disciples and the narrative of Mark for the exact same event and not see contradictions, right? But for people who were told that the Bible was written by the Spirit of God holding the hand of a man and every word is exactly correct and there are no contradictions, like, Sarah and I have talked about this a lot. It's hard to handle at first, and you have to really be gentle and go slow and kind of tease apart this idea of what's truth and what's fact. But it's hard work, and for a lot of people, they can't do it. It's too hard, and they either have to just throw the whole thing away and say, therefore Christianity is meaningless, and I don't want to have anything to do with it. Or they say that we're crazy and I'm a heretic and the Bible is what it says it is. And, they go back to their unaffirming churches.
Gotcha.
You know, who's this cutie?
He's cute. He, she.
You want to say this DJ?
Hey, DJ.
Hey, DJ.
Hi.
What's up, man?
I don't know.
Their movie's over.
Yeah.
I bribed them with a movie.
What movie,
Hey,
DJ?
good job, Mom.
Wreck-It Ralph.
Wreck-It Ralph.
I've never seen Wreck-It Ralph.
So good.
Okay. Well, I think maybe we should close down the talking heads here and we should all go watch Wreck-It Ralph.
Okay.
Good to me.
Mhm.
All right. All right, DJ, is that okay with you? Okay. Go get some ice cream.
Okay.
I did. I bribed them with ice cream too.
Yeah, where Sarah Lynch is, there is generally ice cream.
It's true. I've tried to quit many times.
Just
Doesn't work.
So cute. Oh my God. It's just adorable, Sarah. Anyway, okay. We're going to have ICA one time here for Sarah. We're going to have Ice Cream Anonymous.
I love
Does
that.
that work? Really?
Mm-mm.
Nope.
Nope.
All right, DJ, get them to show you where to push the little button and you can shut us off, okay?
I don't know though.
Hey, listen, safe travels to you, Jan.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Yeah. I will
Enjoy the rest
say.
of your week.
We'll
Yep.
be back Friday night.
All right.
Cool.
Bye.
Bye-bye, everybody.
Bye.
Have a good night.
Okay. And we're out.